Can you hear that? That sounds like a completely different mic position to me. That blew my mind the first time I heard it. Today, I want to show you a very powerful yet easy to use way to change the sound of your microphone when recording. Most modern mic preamps have this fancy feature. You can switch their input impedance, and that is so powerful, as you will see in this video. The problem is most people don't know what it is and they don't know how to use it, and that's why they don't use it. And that's hopefully going to change after watching this video. Today, I want to ask, what is it? How does it sound? And what can it do for you? We're going to record high gain guitars and even acoustic guitars. We're going to use condenser mics, ribbon mics, and dynamic mics. And I'm pretty sure after watching this video, you will start doing some mic pre input impedance experiments. Here we go. But first, I want to give you an overview of this video. I'm going to start with explaining what this is. After that, I will talk about the gear that we're going to use, especially the mic preamp that we're going to use, but also the microphones. And then we're going to record high gain guitars and acoustic guitars and listen to the different settings and compare them and have a lot of fun. I highly recommend watching the entire video so you really understand what I'm talking about. But if you have some kind of 1-minute TikTok attention span, no problem. I've added some chapters below so you can navigate to wherever you want to go. I'm not going to try to explain impedance in this video. That would make it way too long. But if you want to dive deeper, there is a fantastic article from Audient on the Audient homepage, and that article is idiot-proof enough so even people like me and you understand what impedance is. There's a link below, check it out. I'm just going to try to give you the information that you need as a user. And here's the most important thing that you need to understand. Your microphone might behave differently, might sound differently, depending on the input impedance of a preamp. I say might because it's always the interaction between the microphone and the mic preamp. It depends on the output impedance of the microphone and the input impedance of the mic preamp. Sometimes the difference can be big, sometimes it can be very small, but it's always the interaction between those two parts of the chain. There is a rule of thumb that you can read everywhere. I'm pretty sure you also find it in this Audient article. And it says that the input impedance of the mic preamp should be at least 5 times higher than the output impedance of your microphone. So if we have a dynamic mic with an output impedance of, let's say, 300 ohm, the input impedance should be at least 1.5 kilo ohm or 1,500 ohms in order to make the microphone happy, in order to make the microphone perform as it should. So that is technically recommended. The higher the impedance of the mic preamp, the better it actually is. The more hi-fi things are going to sound. Also, the higher the level will be, the less noise you get, blah, blah, blah. But then again, we know that what is technically correct might not always be musically desirable. There are a lot of engineers and great producers out there who actually mismatch the settings, who use a way lower input impedance because they like the sound of it. And whatever sounds right is right. Correct? Most of the modern and super clean and transparent sounding preamps do have a really high input impedance for that reason, very often above 2 kilo ohms. But if we look at the classic mic preamps that everybody loves, API and Neve, they are much lower. API, I think, is around 1 kilo ohm. The Neve preamps, the 1073, they can even be switched down to 300 ohms. Isn't that interesting? So that should be much too low for any of the mics that you might be using. But hey, if it sounds cool. Anyway, so the whole idea behind giving you different options is that this is a tool to shape the sound of your microphone. That means if you have a preamp that can go from 2 kilo ohm down to 300 or something, you can go from a classic Neve type input impedance over maybe API up to something super modern. Let's talk about the gear we're going to use. Let's talk about the mic preamp first. We got a whole bunch of different mic preamps with input impedance switching here at Kohle Studio, a Chandler TG2, the classic Focusrite ISA. We've got Neve modules from Heritage, Dave Hill's preamp, a lot of stuff. But what we're going to use is a preamp that we just bought. It's an 8-channel preamp, and this one is the ASP 880 from Audient. Why did we get that? Well, first of all, we needed some more channels for recording drums at Studio B over there. And the reason we got this one is that I know how the classic Audient preamp sounds. I've used it quite a few times, especially when I was working on their bigger consoles. I'm sure you have seen me working on Audient consoles. It's a fantastic sounding, clean preamp that takes everything you throw at it. And you also find it in their ID range of audio interfaces. Very affordable, good sounding, a clear recommendation. I mean, we just bought it, so, you know. But the reason was not only that it sounds great, the other reason is that it offers a lot of functionality, a lot of bells and whistles. First of all, it's not only an 8-channel preamp, it's also an 8-channel converter, which comes handy. But then you have a lot of cool stuff added. We've got the impedance switching, which is nice. You got a switchable insert. I really like that. You got a variable low cut on the way in. And finally, one thing that I love about this box is that the preamps and the converters can be used at two different devices. You can link them with one push of a button, or you can decouple them, which means you can use them separately. So that means, for example, when you're mixing and you don't need the mic pre's anymore, you can use the converters for something else. And then you can go back to recording. So it's a lot of smart stuff. And it is the perfect tool for this test because we're going to have several microphones at the same time and we want to have the same performance. So we need a multi-channel preamp. And this preamp has 3 different settings that go from really low to really high. I got to look it up. So the lowest setting is at 220 ohms, really, really low. And the highest one is at 2.8 kilo ohms, so really, really high. That means if there are any differences, we should hear them with this preamp. There's also a setting in between at 1.2 kilo ohm, which is, I think, close to API. But we're not going to use this one. I'm just going to use the 2 extremes. That's going to be enough to explain the differences. And from my experience, the setting in between really sounds like something in between. So that's the preamp. Let's talk about the microphones. I want to use 3 different microphones, 1 condenser, 1 dynamic, and 1 ribbon microphone. And I chose kind of like my current favorites because they're all real workhorses. The condenser microphone is the little brother of this one you see here. This is the Austrian OC818, which is, I guess, my current favorite condenser microphone, which just works on pretty much everything. I use it on drums, overheads, guitars, acoustic guitars, vocals, and it is my clear recommendation. If you just, can afford one high quality condenser mic, have a look at the Austrian. We're using the little brother, which I think is called OC18. I hope I'm not mistaken. We'll put it here. That's the cardioid only version of the OC818. So if you don't need the double capsule, that makes it a lot more affordable. So that is our condenser microphone today. Then we're going to use, of course, the classic SM57, which is my favorite guitar microphone and is a workhorse. Doesn't need any introduction, right? And the third microphone is a ribbon microphone. And you might know from my previous videos that I'm in a wild romance at the moment with AEA microphones. So today we're using the passive AEA R92 as well. And another rule of thumb is that passive microphones, dynamic or ribbon microphones, show more of a reaction to input impedance switching compared to microphones, condenser microphones with an active output stage like the Austrian here. But let's see if that is actually true. We're recording all signals directly in the live room. Here you can see the setup. So the mics go directly into the ASP. The ASP is also the converter and the clock master. And then we're going via ADAT into the Audient Evo 16 interface into my Creative Devices laptop. I add another link below. So now it's finally time to record some guitars, and I want to start with the high gain guitars. 2 words about the signal chain we're using. We are using the Grindstein Song DI tracks, and we're shooting them through a, here it is, can you see it? Radial passive reamp box into a tube screamer, into this Diesel D-Moll amplifier, which is my favorite Diesel and a very underrated amp. Sounds great. Into a Mesa Boogie standard 4x12 cab from 2002 with vintage 30s. I've placed all the mics, so I like the sound of them. And we're going to reamp in the low setting and the high setting. Let's see what happens. Here we go. I have reamped the guitars in stereo, like 2 guitars left, right, because that makes it a little easier to hear the differences. You can see different colors here. Red is always the 57, yellow is the Austrian Audio OC18, and green is the AEA R92. And I want to start with the SM57. So here we've got the high impedance setting. I'm going to start with that, and at some point I'm going to switch to low impedance. Let's see what happens. Can you hear that? That sounds like a completely different mic position to me. That blew my mind the first time I heard it. The low impedance position, the incorrect position, sounds so much more in your face. Have another listen. If I go from here, all the mids come alive. There's a lot more grind. It also seems to be a lot tighter in the low end. So all the palm mutes sound way thicker on the high impedance setting. But I do prefer them on the low impedance setting like this, because they sound much more mix ready to me. We are fighting all the low end on the palm mutes anyway. And it's so cool. By lowering the impedance, I think we're reducing the bandwidth of the frequency range a bit, especially in the lows, which kind of boosts the mids a little bit and makes the guitar sound more in your face. I'm surprised. I really like the 250 ohm low impedance setting. Let's have another listen. I start with high impedance. The low impedance setting also feels a little louder. Again, it's technically the same level, but even when I boost the high impedance guitars, let's say by a dB, you can still hear how much mid grind is added by lowering the impedance. Let's move on. Let's have a listen to the Austrian condenser microphone. Once again, we start with the high impedance. You see this? I'm switching all the time. I don't hear a difference. And just as expected, there's no real reaction from this mic, being a condenser microphone with active output electronics. So the Austrian Audio OC18 will sound like an OC18 no matter which impedance setting you use, which you could say makes it a lot more reliable. It's always going to have that same sound, whereas a microphone like an SM57 might change. Let's check out the AEA ribbon microphone. Same thing like with the 57. It sounds more direct, more in your face, a little tighter. And once again, I prefer the low impedance setting. And this is especially great for ribbon microphones. You know, you can tame the low end, you can make it a little more mid-forward. That's what you want, right? For a guitar tone like this. And by the way, I did another reamping round, and this time I used my API, what is it called? 3124 Plus preamp, which has an input impedance of 1100 ohms. So it sits right in the middle between our two settings. And as you will hear, it sounds exactly like that. So let's start with the 57 and the high impedance. And you see the API has a little more grind, sounds a little more open already. And now I'm going to switch to the low impedance. And it even opens up a little more. I mean, the API sounds great as well, right? It's just, you know, the cool part about being able to switch this is that you have options. With the API, I don't have options. With the Audient, I do have options. But I should start recording guitars at lower impedance. This is amazing. And because I know you will ask for this, I'm just going to switch a few times between the different microphones so you can hear the difference. So this is the 57, this is the Austrian, and this is the AEA. Let's go. I think those three mics give you a whole range of different tones and possible combinations. All right, this was interesting, wasn't it? But let's move on and record some acoustic guitars. Maybe that's a different story. Let's start with the 57 in the high impedance mode. Big difference again. Now this sounds rather honky. High impedance again. You can clearly hear some kind of 1K honk boost. Or maybe it's not a boost, it's just less highs and lows. But I can also clearly tell that all the nice shimmery high frequencies of the high impedance setting are gone with the low impedance. Focus on the highs. So here, it's the exact opposite. How interesting is that? Here I want a more hi-fi sounding tone. I want more highs, I want more lows. I don't want that honky mid-range that I kind of like with the metal guitars. So here I would clearly set the impedance as high as possible. Let's check out the Austrian microphone. I'm not expecting a big difference once again. Of course, sounds a lot more hi-fi compared to the 57. So once again, the Austrian Audio OC18 is going to sound what it sounds like. It's not going to care about the mic preamp input impedance. Let's move on with the ribbon mic, the R92. Okay, it gets more honky again, but it's not as extreme as with the 57. And once again, I prefer the high impedance setting. We're recording an acoustic guitar, you know, we want to hear those nice shimmery high frequencies. We want to hear this in full range. And it seems like the lower impedance setting is just like, you know, focusing more on the mid-range and reducing both the highs and the lows. I couldn't hear that difference on the highs on the metal guitars. The reason is there are no real highs. There isn't anything above whatever 10K, but here you can clearly hear the difference. But this is interesting, right? So for acoustic guitars, you really want to go for, I would say, the highest setting possible. And for Juga Juga metal guitars, the opposite. unless you're looking for a certain tone. Maybe if you want to record a guitar that sounds a little more mid-rangey and a little more vibey for your vintage rock band or something, maybe this is even cool for an acoustic guitar recording that shouldn't be too high fidelity. But what you should take away is that you can shape the frequency range of your guitar by changing the input impedance. The lower it gets, the more it reduces the highs and the lows, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. The only problem that I have with this is that as soon as you change the impedance, the gain changes dramatically. So between those two settings, you have at least 10 dB of gain, which makes it pretty much impossible to compare this on the fly. You always have to compensate the gain. If you make something 1 dB louder, you might already prefer it. So you have to do test recordings to compare this. It would be amazing to have a mic pre where when I switch the input impedance, it gets like the gain change gets compensated. If that's even possible, I don't know. Audient, could you, in your next update, please include that. That would be amazing. But again, this is just a wonderful tool to have. And I can just recommend to dive into input impedance and do some experiments. Awesome. If you want to download the raw multitracks, you can, and you can compare them yourself. All you got to do is sign up to my email list and sell your soul to the devil. As usual, I'll take care of it. No problem. There's a link below to my email list. Follow the instructions on the email list, and in the last confirmation mail, you get a link to the Discord server where we have those files. If that's too complex for you, don't do it. Okay? But most people have managed to do so. That's where you can get the files. Check out the link below. Anyway, check out those lovely microphones. Those might be my 3. Give me stereo pairs of all 3 of them. That might be a great desert island setup. So check out those microphones, Austrian, AEA, and of course the 50. You know the 57 already. Check out the Diesel amp, and especially check out that Audient preamp, because I think it's a real workhorse, a real bargain. All the Audient stuff I have tested so far sounds amazing. I've done drum sessions, guitar sessions on the consoles, on the mic pre's, and I'm even using their Evo stuff when I'm on the road. Really good stuff, highly recommended. That's all for today. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Let me know what you think about this. Was this inspiring or not? Or are you already using input impedance switching on your mic pre? You let me know. I'll try to answer all those comments down there. I see you in hell, motherfuckers. Bye-bye.